All right, so get ready, everybody. It's time for another deep dive. And this one, well, this one's pretty fascinating. We're going to be talking all about the psychology of deception. And I have to say, you sent over some incredibly intriguing material for this deep dive. We've got audiobook excerpts, news articles, all about con artists and scams, and this really surprising connection between storytelling, emotion, and how we believe. It's almost like a magic trick. I mean, have you ever wondered how some people fall for scams that seem, well, kind of obvious to others? Like, how could anyone believe that?
Right. It's fascinating how our minds work. We often think of ourselves as these super logical beings. But the truth is, our emotions actually play a much bigger role in our decision making than we might even realize.
Especially when we're under pressure.
Exactly. It's like in those moments, our gut kind of takes over before our brains have a chance to catch up. I think one of the sources actually called it, what was it? Oh, yeah, visceral
Ooh,
influence.
that's interesting. Visceral influence.
Yeah. And it makes sense, right? Because it means that our emotions are actually creating these strong instinctive reactions that sometimes, well, they just completely override our logic. It's like a shortcut our brains use. It's called the affect heuristic. And basically, we kind of judge something as good or bad based purely on how it makes us feel. We don't even stop to analyze all the facts.
You know what that reminds me of? Think about the last time you saw some amazing online deal, like a flash sale with that little countdown timer.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Doesn't it just create this instant sense of urgency? Like, oh my God, I have to buy it right now or I'm going to miss out.
Oh, for sure. That's a perfect example. That's exactly how visceral influence works. And con artists, well, they're pros at this. They create this sense of pressure, this urgency, and it just pushes you to act
Yeah.
without even thinking things through.
The sources mentioned,
Hmm.
car salespeople and realtors as classic examples of this. They use these high pressure tactics
Yeah.
and they tap into, our fear of missing out
Hmm.
and our desire for a good deal. I think we've all been there.
Oh, yeah. We get so caught up in the moment, we don't even stop to consider if we actually need the car
Right,
or the house.
right. It's crazy.
And it's not just in those situations either. Think about cults. They use those intense emotional experiences, like love bombing, or they create this sense of fear and isolation to recruit people.
It's like they create this emotional whirlwind that makes it hard to think clearly.
Exactly. And those emotions, whether they're positive or negative, well, they can just cloud our judgment and make us more vulnerable to manipulation.
That actually leads us to another fascinating point from these sources, the power of storytelling.
Oh, yeah. Stories.
The sources explain how. Stories can sometimes be even more persuasive than logical arguments.
Isn't that wild?
It's a bit mind-boggling.
It is. But stories, they have this really unique ability to engage our empathy. They allow us to step into someone else's shoes
Yeah.
and see the world from their eyes. And it's like our defenses kind of come down when we're caught up in a good story.
And don't we also feel more connected to the person telling us that story?
That's it. You hit the nail on the head. When someone tells you a really personal story, it creates a sense of trust and intimacy that can be easily exploited.
It's almost like it's happening subconsciously. We're not
Right.
thinking, oh, this person's telling me a story, so I should trust them.
Right. It's just this natural human reaction.
It's like we're programmed for stories.
We are. And they tap into our emotions. And they often bypass our critical thinking. The sources also mention that stories can transport us into different worlds, which makes even unbelievable details seem totally plausible.
The sources mentioned Shakespeare, actually, the Mark Antony Gambit from Julius Caesar. I mean, he uses storytelling to sway the crowd to his side, even though at the start they hated Caesar.
I love that example.
He doesn't present this logical argument or attack his opponents. Instead, he tells a story about Caesar's love for Rome and his generosity.
Wow, that's powerful.
He completely flips the script.
He does. And he uses their emotions.
Yeah, he plays on their emotions.
And that's how a good story can change our minds, even about things we might not normally accept.
It's brilliant.
Con artists are masters at this too. They know how to tell a story. That resonates with their targets. They tap into their desires, their fears, their vulnerabilities.
One of the sources talked about this guy, Garrett Lyon. He was scamming people with this really sad story about his sick kid.
Oh, wow.
It's horrifying that anyone would do that, but it shows how powerful storytelling can be. I mean, who would question a desperate father?
Right. Our empathy makes us want to believe. And then, well, That's when we become vulnerable.
It's like those Super Bowl ads,
Yeah.
the really good ones. They tell these mini stories,
Oh, for sure.
like that Budweiser one with the puppy and the horse.
I know exactly what you're talking
It
about.
has nothing to do with logic. It's all about creating an emotional connection.
That's it. Storytelling isn't inherently good or bad. It's a tool.
And it can be used for good or bad.
You
Okay, so we've talked about emotion. We've talked about storytelling.
Yeah.
Now there's this other idea from the sources, wishful identification. What is that all about?
Wishful identification is kind of like, well, we're more easily persuaded by someone we admire or someone we want to be like.
Hmm.
Con artists use this all the time. They create these personas with qualities their targets want, like, I don't know, wealth, success, power.
One source used Richard Harley as an example. He was posing as this wealthy oil tycoon
Oh,
to
yeah.
attract investors.
He was selling a fantasy, the kind of life his victims wanted.
It's so manipulative.
It is, but it's effective.
Yeah.
Because they dangle this image of a better life. And they make you believe that if you're in their circle, you'll get there too.
Oh, wow. It's like falling down a rabbit hole. You get sucked in.
Exactly. And, think about it. Have you ever felt drawn to someone's success and wished you had what they had?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
their use
It's
there.
playing on our deepest desires.
And our insecurities.
Right.
But they don't just exploit any emotion. They tailor their approach to specific emotions.
So it's like they're emotional strategists.
You got it. They know exactly what buttons to push.
So how do they use sadness, happiness, and fear?
Okay, so sadness, right? Well, research shows that sadness can make us more risk-averse, but also more impulsive.
Especially with money.
Exactly.
When you're down, you might jump at any chance to improve your situation.
Even if it's risky.
That makes sense.
Con artists know this. They target people going through tough times. Funerals, divorces, job losses.
That's awful.
It is. So be careful when you're feeling vulnerable. Don't let anyone pressure you into making big decisions.
What about happiness? How does that make us vulnerable?
This might surprise you, but happiness can actually make us less analytical.
Really?
And more open to persuasion.
So we might fall for someone who seems charming.
Exactly, even if their arguments are weak.
We get caught up in the good vibes.
Right, and we don't want to ruin the mood.
It's like, don't bring me down.
And then there's fear.
Oh yeah, fear is a big one.
It's probably the most powerful emotion con artists use.
Because it can shut down rational thought, right?
It can. We go into survival mode.
We just react.
And that's when we make bad decisions.
Yeah, and con artists are experts at creating a sense of threat.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it's fear of illness, financial ruin, physical harm.
Whatever works.
The sources actually mention some chilling examples, like con artists targeting people at funerals.
Wow.
They take advantage of people's grief and fear.
It's horrible, but it happens.
Then there are all those health scams, exploiting anxieties about illness, promising those miracle cures
You're right. They prey on that desire for a simple solution.
to a complex problem.
Exactly.
The sources also talk about this fraudulent bomb detector that was sold to countries after the Iraq War.
Oh, wow.
People's lives were put at risk
That's a terrifying example of how fear can be used.
to make us believe something that's not true. So we've talked about emotion, storytelling. But how do con artists actually reel us in? The sources talk about these 6 principles of persuasion from Robert Cialdini.
Oh, yeah, Cialdini.
And they mention this rope stage of the con.
The rope stage is where they really draw you in.
Okay, so explain Cialdini's principles.
They're kind of like a roadmap for persuasion.
Okay, so which of these principles are most relevant to the cons we've talked about?
Well, 2 stand out. Foot in the door and door in the face.
Okay, let's start with foot in the door.
So, the idea is you get someone to agree to a small request first,
Okay,
and then they're more likely to agree to a larger one later.
like that Prince Billion Morrison guy.
Oh, yeah, with the pen pal scheme.
He started with something harmless, right?
Pen pals, and then it escalated.
To asking for money, old pants, all sorts of things.
It's amazing how a small request can open the door to something bigger.
It plays on our need to be consistent.
We don't like to contradict ourselves. Exactly. Once we've agreed to something, we're more likely to keep going, even if it's not a good idea.
Right, so we avoid that cognitive dissonance,
Yes,
that uncomfortable feeling of going against our values.
you got it.
There was also that Matthew Dunger Brown guy.
Oh, yeah, him too.
He started by volunteering.
Right, and then, well, he ended up with access to his boss's bank account.
That's scary.
Classic foot in the door.
So they slowly build trust.
And then they exploit it.
Okay, now what about door in the face?
So that's the opposite. You start with a huge, ridiculous request. that you know they'll say no to,
And
then you ask for something smaller.
so it seems more reasonable.
Exactly. They feel a little guilty for saying no the first time.
And they're more likely to agree to the second request,
Can make up for it.
like Sebastian von Anhalt.
Oh, yeah. At that charity auction.
He offered a huge donation.
That he never intended to pay.
And then he got the hostess to accept a smaller check.
That also bounced.
It's a textbook door in the face.
It is.
It's amazing how these techniques work,
They're subtle.
but so effective.
And that's why we need to understand them so we can protect ourselves.
Speaking of recognizing manipulation,
Yeah.
what about this "that's not all" technique?
Oh, that's a classic. You start with an offer,
No.
and then you make it even better before they can say yes or no.
It's like those infomercials.
But wait, there's more.
Exactly.
They want to make you feel like you're getting this amazing deal.
And you'd be crazy to say no.
Exactly. They play on our desire for reciprocity.
We feel obligated to give back.
And we don't want to miss out.
Right, it's loss aversion.
Got it.
So con artists create these elaborate plays
They're like master puppeteers.
to exploit our psychology.
It's true, but, sometimes people aren't even trying to deceive others.
What? So unintentional con artists.
Yeah, they actually believe their own fabrications.
That's fascinating.
It is. They're not consciously lying.
They've just convinced themselves that their version of events is the truth.
They've built their own reality.
It's like that Rolling Stone campus rape story.
Oh, right.
So powerful, so heartbreaking.
Fabricated.
It shows how a good story can overpower skepticism.
Even journalists can fall for it.
It's like we want to believe
So badly.
that it clouds our judgment.
It does. And it's important to fact check, even when it's a story you really want to believe.
Absolutely. There were other cases too. Stephen Glass, Janet Cook, Jason Blair,
Oh, I remember those.
all journalists.
It-
Reputable places.
It's shocking.
It makes you wonder if they believed their own lies at first.
And then got trapped.
This is a slippery slope.
Once you start fabricating, it can be hard to stop.
It's like this pressure to keep up the illusion.
Right, and the fear of getting caught.
It makes you wonder what drives people to that.
That's a whole other topic.
Maybe another deep dive.
Sure.
But for now,
Yay.
I think we've covered a lot.
We have.
Emotion, storytelling, unintentional con artists.
We've gone deep.
So the big takeaway is we need to be aware of these tactics.
Yeah.
Whether it's deliberate deception or unintentional.
We need to be critical thinkers.
Evaluate the evidence.
Don't let our emotions take over completely.
And recognize that we're all vulnerable,
To being fooled.
no matter how smart we think we are.
That's right. Yeah. It's like that saying, right? If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. We have to question things, even when we want to believe.
Totally agree. And that's where critical thinking comes in. Being skeptical, looking at the evidence.
Not letting our emotions completely run the show.
Right, because con artists are always adapting,
Oh, yeah. They're always one step ahead.
looking for new ways to exploit us.
They're like masterminds of manipulation.
So it's not just about learning a few tricks.
Nope.
It's an ongoing process.
Of awareness, education.
And self-reflection.
Exactly. We have to be willing to admit that we can all be fooled.
Even the smartest of us.
It's humbling, but it's true.
Okay, so speaking of being fooled, I want to focus on something from the sources. That really stood out to me. The impact of emotion on our decisions.
Oh, that's a big one.
It's like our feelings literally shape how we process information.
The sources had some really interesting insights on that.
Like, it's not just that we feel things.
Right.
Those feelings actually give us data
Data that we use to make judgments.
and decisions.
Exactly. There's these two psychologists, Norbert Schwartz and Gerald Clore.
Oh.
They did some groundbreaking research on this whole mood is information thing.
Mood as information.
Yeah. They found that when we're making a judgment, we kind of unconsciously ask ourselves, how do I feel about this?
Interesting.
So if something makes us feel good, we tend to see it in a positive light.
Even if there's no logical reason for that.
Exactly. And the opposite is true, too. If something makes us feel bad, we see it as a problem.
So it's like our emotions are creating this filter through which we see the world.
You got it. And that filter can be manipulated.
By con artists.
Of course. They know how to trigger emotions.
To make us more susceptible.
To their tricks.
So for example, if a con artist wants to sell you on a risky investment,
Oh, yeah.
they might try to make you feel excited,
pump you up.
greedy,
Like you're going to miss out on a huge opportunity
Right.
if you don't act now.
or if they're trying to get you to donate to a fake charity.
They might play on your empathy.
Your compassion,
Tell you a really sad story.
to get you to open your wallet.
Exactly. It's all about tailoring the emotion.
To the con, no.
They're pros at this.
It's kind of scary how good they are at it.
It is a bit unnerving.
So this whole idea that our emotions actually provide information,
Yeah.
it really changes how we think about feelings.
Right. It's not just some fluffy, subjective thing. Data that we use.
To make sense of the world.
And to act.
This all ties into another concept from the sources, the affect heuristic.
Oh, yeah, the affect heuristic. It's a mental shortcut.
A way for us to make quick judgments.
Based on our emotional responses.
So instead of analyzing all the facts,
we just go with our gut.
which sometimes is fine.
Yeah, if it's a simple decision.
But not so much. When it's something complex.
Or something we're unfamiliar with.
Right, and that's where con artists can really get us.
They know how to trigger those emotions.
To bypass our rational thinking.
And we end up making a decision that we regret later.
The sources use this great example to show how the affect heuristic can be manipulated.
What was it?
Fake parking tickets.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic study.
So they put fake tickets on cars.
To make people anxious.
And then they approach the drivers.
And ask for a favor.
And guess what?
What?
The drivers who had just felt that relief.
Relief from the fake ticket.
They were the most likely to agree.
Wow, that's fascinating.
It's like the relief made them more susceptible.
To persuasion.
It's incredible how emotional manipulation can mess with our thinking.
It really shows how powerful it can be.
So we should watch out for anyone trying to rush us into a decision.
Especially if they're playing on our emotions.
Exactly. If someone's pressuring you to act quickly, that's a big red flag.
It could be a con.
Because they don't want you to think things through.
They want you to react.
On emotion.
Right, so they might say, this offer is only available for a limited time.
You have to act now.
Before it's too late.
Classic pressure tactics.
So whenever you feel that pressure, take a step back.
Breathe.
And ask yourself, what's really going on here?
Excellent advice. This reminds me of another concept from the sources, the affect pool.
Affect pool. Oh, yeah. That's Paul Slovic's idea.
He's a psychologist.
Yeah, he said that our current emotions can trigger memories of similar experiences.
I'm the best.
And those memories can influence how we see things in the present.
So for example, let's say you had a bad experience with a used car salesman.
Okay.
Next time you meet a used car salesman,
even a different one,
those negative feelings might come back.
And you might not trust this new guy.
Even if he's totally honest.
Exactly. Your past experiences create this pool of emotions.
An affect pool.
That can bias your judgment.
Even if those judgments aren't rational. It's like emotional baggage.
That we carry.
Affecting how we see things.
And how we make decisions.
Wow, that's heavy.
And con artists know about this.
They use it to their advantage.
They might try to trigger those negative associations.
To make us more fearful.
More suspicious.
And then we're more likely to fall for their scams.
Because we're not thinking clearly.
It's not just about the emotions we're feeling now.
It's about all those past emotions, too.
It's complex.
It is, and it shows how important it is to be aware of our emotional triggers.
And how they might be influencing us.
It's not easy.
But it's crucial.
For protecting ourselves.
Okay, so as we go deeper into this world of deception, let's look at how specific emotions make us vulnerable to different types of cons.
Okay, let's break it down.
We talked about sadness.
And how it can make us prone to risk-taking.
And impulsive behavior.
Foreign artists often target people who are going through tough times.
Because they know those people are more likely to jump at any opportunity.
That promises to ease their pain.
So when we're sad,
our judgment might be clouded.
We might take risks we wouldn't normally take.
And that makes us prime target.
For financial scams.
Or those get-rich-quick schemes.
It's important to be extra careful.
When you're feeling emotionally vulnerable,
especially with money,
always a good idea to talk to someone you trust.
Before making any big financial decisions,
get a second opinion.
You know, one thing I found surprising is how happiness can make us more susceptible to persuasion.
Yeah, that's counterintuitive.
You'd think happiness would make us more discerning.
But research shows that it can actually make us less analytical.
Really?
And more easily swayed by superficial cues.
So we might fall for someone just because they're charming.
Or charismatic.
Even if their arguments are weak.
That's right. When we're happy, we might not be as critical.
We don't want to question things.
We're just enjoying the good vibes.
Con artists can really use this to their advantage.
Oh, yeah.
They create this positive atmosphere.
Make you feel like you're part of something special.
And then it's easy to overlook the warning signs.
Exactly. So even when you're feeling good, It's important to stay skeptical.
Don't let your happiness completely cloud your judgment.
Take a step back and assess things objectively.
And then there's fear,
Ah,
the
fear.
most powerful emotion of all.
It can shut down our rational thinking
Completely.
and make us act impulsively.
Just to escape the threat.
Con artists are masters of creating that sense of threat.
Whether it's illness, financial ruin, physical harm,
They know how to push our buttons,
trigger that fear response.
make us desperate for a solution.
Any solution.
Even if it's a bad one.
The sources talk about all those health scams,
Oh, yeah, the ones that prey on our anxieties,
about illness.
promising miracle cures.
They offer hope,
When we're feeling vulnerable.
and that can make us believe anything.
Even if it's not true,
Desperate time.
call for desperate measures
And con artists are always there.
to take advantage.
There's also that example of the fake bomb detector.
Right, the ones sold after the Iraq War
People's lives were put at risk.
because of fear
It shows how powerful fear can be.
and how easily it can be manipulated.
So we have to be careful,
Mm-hmm.
especially when we're feeling those strong emotional pulls.
Absolutely.
Be critical. Ask questions.
Don't just blindly believe.
Especially when it comes to issues that trigger fear.
Right.
So to wrap up this part, I think the key message is understand your own emotional vulnerabilities.
Know your triggers
Be aware of how your emotions might be affecting your thinking.
and your decisions.
Con artists are always coming up with new tactics.
They're always trying to stay one step ahead.
So we have to stay vigilant
Skeptical.
and ready to ask questions.
Even when we're feeling those strong emotional pulls
Awareness is our best defense.
against manipulation.
It's kind of mind-blowing, right?
Yeah.
All these techniques, how con artists play on our emotions, it makes you think about those times when people aren't even intentionally deceiving others. The sources mention this idea of the unintentional con artist.
Oh, yeah. That's interesting.
It's not deliberate deception.
Right. It's more like they genuinely believe their own stories.
They've convinced themselves that their version of events is true,
It's like they've built their own reality.
and they're living in it. The Rolling Stone campus rape story is a good example.
Oh, right. That one.
Such a powerful story,
Heartbreaking.
but it turned out to be largely fabricated,
A compelling narrative can really overshadow skepticism,
even for journalists.
especially when it aligns with their own belief.
It's like we want to believe it so badly,
Yet we don't see the red flags.
our judgment gets clouded.
It's important to do your due diligence,
Fact check. Challenge your own assumptions.
even when it's a story you really want to believe.
There were other cases too, right?
Oh, yeah, like Stephen Glass,
Janet Cook,
Jason Blair.
all journalists at reputable publications.
It's crazy to think about.
It makes you wonder, did they start out believing their own stories?
And then got caught up in the lie.
It's a slippery slope.
Once you start fabricating, it can be hard to stop.
The pressure to keep up the facade.
The fear of getting caught.
It must be immense. What drives people to that?
That's a whole other deep dive.
We could talk for hours.
But for now, I think we've covered so much ground.
We've explored the psychology of deception, how emotions and storytelling can be used against us, and even those cases of unintentional con artistry.
It's been a fascinating journey,
A little unsettling at times.
but definitely eye-opening.
So I think the big takeaway is we need to be aware,
Of the tactics,
both deliberate and unintentional.
we need to be critical thinkers.
Evaluate the evidence.
Don't let our emotions completely rule us.
And remember,
We all have vulnerabilities,
we can all be fooled.
no matter how smart we think we are.
So before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Okay, I'm listening.
We've talked a lot about the dark side of storytelling, but stories can also be a force for good.
Absolutely. They can inspire us,
Educate us, connect us,
help us understand different perspectives.
build empathy. So here's the question to ponder. How can we use the power of storytelling for positive change?
While also being mindful of its potential for manipulation.
That's the challenge.
It's a tool.
And like any tool,
It can be used for good or bad.
it's up to us to use it responsibly. Well said. And on that note, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive into the world of deception.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us. Until next time, stay curious
Stay skeptical.
and stay informed.